Curiosity is key because if we're not curious, we don't even know it's trauma.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Tales from the Journey. I am Stephanie Zamora, and today we are here with Johnson Chong, who is the best selling and award winning author of Sage Sapien, a shamanic guide, a speaker, and a transformational coach who has just an amazing body of work and such a great story to share with us today. So, Johnson, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Stephanie, for having me on your show.
Yeah, I would love to start with you sharing just a little bit more about yourself and what it is that you do.
That's always an interesting question, right? What do you do? I guess I can start by you shared a lot of the broad strokes and the themes. And I suppose you can say that I work with various types of alternative modalities and tools to help people remember themselves. And I have been working with a large community of people that have spanned across more corporate types of people to more freelancers, men, women, mainly women. And so actually for 2021, my focus is actually more on the LGBTQ plus community and really honing in on this concept of karma and working through the unconscious karma that we carry. A lot of that's unresolved emotional trauma, let's say, or it could be conditioned patterns of beliefs, limiting beliefs, fears, guilt, shame, all of these things that center around identity, especially for queer people. We tend to harbor, me being a gay person myself, we tend to hold onto things differently since we are a minority in the world. And so, really helping people break through that so they can come into a place of self love, acceptance, more inner freedom, and joy, no matter what goes on around us in the external world. So, that's
Yeah.
the bulk of what I do.
Yeah, so powerful. And I love what you talk about on your website about different types of people that inherently go against the grain. And I know that that was something that was true of you, what it sounds like, what I've read about your story when you were a child as well. And so I'd love to kind of go back to the beginning of your story, what your childhood was like, who you were, and kind of start there.
Sure. So yeah, I was a very unruly child. I think I think there was always something innately within me that questioned everything my parents said and did and everyone around me. I think part of that was also my environment. I grew up in New York City. I was actually born and raised in New York, and then in Brooklyn there's just so many cultures. You have so many different sounds and accents and subcultures. I lived in a very mixed neighborhood, lots of Jamaicans. I would actually come home sometimes speaking in a Jamaican accent. I would be like, "Hey, mom," huh? Like I don't know what I did, but it was very because my parents, my mom, my dad had a little fish market, so he would leave me with the Rastafarians in their fish restaurant, and I would just spend the whole day with them, and then that was my daycare. So, and then you also had lots of, there was a big Latino community, and so I think I was quite quiet as a kid, and language and communication was always fascinating to me because I would observe and notice that people were speaking different things and expressing things differently. And it wasn't until I realized that I was actually speaking Cantonese at home when I went to preschool and noticed that, wait, these other kids are speaking English. What's that? And that tends to happen a lot in New York. And because a lot of these bicultural, multicultural communities are, are existing in their own little bubbles within New York City and in other large metropolitan areas, I think young children that come from immigrant families grow up with this sense of, oh, I'm different, I'm other right away. And so I was very aware of that at a young age. And then throw in the sexual orientation later on, and then realizing, oh, I'm even more other than this other cultural thing. So not
Yeah.
only did I realize, oh, I'm this Asian American kid, when I step into a room, I'm very aware of that. And then wait, now I'm gay as well. I'm attracted to boys. And there has always been this shield that I put up whenever I would walk into a space because I didn't want to be found out. And that led to
Yeah.
some very unhealthy patterns growing up um, into young adulthood because there was this fear of intimacy because I was afraid of sharing of also knowing that my parents are super traditional, knowing that they would not accept. And that was this belief that I had in my head. And they actually still don't accept. I've come out to them about a decade ago, but they still don't accept me to this day because of their values, where they come from, being refugees, experiencing lots of violence and trauma themselves, in a very violent, they had a very violent past. So, uh, and then having to work through all that and understanding where they've come from and how they've parented me, because of their violent upbringing, I actually also experience a rather tumultuous, physical, mental, emotional, verbally abusive
Yeah.
upbringing. So, I mean, it's just lots of things to unpack that I've had to do over the years. And I mean, I think every queer person's journey is a little bit different. Some are more fortunate and they have a very accepting family, and others are less so. And then there's those who are experiencing even more otherness because they fall into some other subcategories. And I think no matter, I don't think it's about comparing like whose journey has been more difficult, but it's really just recognizing that in our otherness, and in what makes us very different, or what makes us feel separate from the mainstream, that's where our gifts lie. And if we can really own that, which is very scary, it's like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
really other. And so most of the time I do feel alone, but now I feel peaceful alone. I don't feel alone, because I do know that not a lot of people can identify with my experience, and it's hard for them to imagine it because I'm in a very small minority of
Right.
people. And I also have lived on 3 continents. So I'm now this enigma. I live in Australia, right? So people are like, "Ooh, who are you? You open your mouth, you sound American, but you look Asian. What?" And people have no idea where I'm from. They just go, "Are you Canadian? Like, what's going on? Oh, you're gay? Oh, tell me more about that." Right? So everywhere, everywhere I go, people are trying to label me and put me into a box, and
Right.
and that's okay. I'm not offended by it anymore. I used to be. Um, and so this is kind of, yeah, I can ramble on and on about identity.
Yeah. What was it like for you? Because you mentioned that, especially when you were younger and in school, like you had put up walls and barriers to keep yourself safe. What was it like for you to begin forming relationships that felt deeply connected and safe and genuine? And at what point in your life were you able to do that?
I think it started when I was 14, and my friend Joanna, I mean, it wasn't in the most conscious of ways, but it was my first attempt at trust. And because me and my siblings, I have an older brother and younger sister, the way that our parents raised us was very much in this dog eat dog mentality. And it was all about rewarding the one who did the best. It was very competitive. And so it wasn't the healthiest way of
Yeah.
parenting. It's just what my parents knew. And uh, what that led me to do was to always, try and outshine everyone else in school. So I actually got straight A's. I didn't actually have to work very hard. I never wanted to be the last one ever in anything I did, whether it was academics or in sports. I wanted to excel at everything. I was this overachiever because of the expectations from my parents. And and in that, I didn't want to show people any of my weaknesses. And so my friend at the time, Joanna, who, at 14, we started taking the school bus together and the train, and we realized we lived down the block, and the one thing that we connected on was bitching at everything. So that was how I started developing trust, was like this little bitchy teenager who was moaning at the world. And that's where I found common ground. And of course, later on, as I evolved, 18, 19, 20, and then actually by 1920, that's when I started experiencing yoga and the spiritual teachings of yoga. And then by 2021, 22, it just kind of was this avalanche of meeting different saints and teachers and masters and various workshop leaders and different facilitators in New York, because New York's it's a massive hub for all of this kind of work. And that's when I started to realize that, oh, wow, me trusting is not the same as commiserating. And I realized that a lot of people they found a bond. And, as children or as young adults, that we tend to commiserate and moan about what's wrong,
Yeah.
versus, oh wow, let me connect authentically and share with you exactly how I feel. And that's probably more risky because you may lose that relationship if the person like totally doesn't get it, or it might strengthen your relationship. And I think it took a while for me to understand what intimacy with myself was, and how to develop that further. And I think a lot of it required separating from people and separating from unhealthy relationships. And I could see that over the years. And I don't talk to that high school friend anymore. Not because there's anything wrong. We've just grown apart, and our different, we have different interests and hobbies. And I started to notice that the friends and the people that I would keep around share a more common understanding that we are having this human experience as energetic beings, spiritual beings, and that there are certain things that just don't have a grip or hold an importance even. And so it doesn't make sense for me to keep people around that still put certain weight on
Right.
dramas, and because then it brings me back into old patterns. And it's not a better than a worse than, it's just this evolution of who we are as people.
Yeah.
um, so I would say that I've had a very tricky relationship with trust with people and intimacy and changing relationships, and I only really have a few friends that I can call, and they would have an understanding of where I am energetically, um, right now where I am. So,
Yeah,
and I think that's different for everyone. Yeah.
definitely. What was your process of, like you mentioned, the sense of being other and having a family system, a family home that was very like, you should look and behave these ways. Like there was a lot of expectation around who you should be when you were younger. What was it like for you? Did you conform in any ways? Did you shut down any aspects of yourself? And for how long, if you did?
Ooh, yes. I think that, well, in Chinese culture, there's the concept of filial piety, which is very much paying respect to your elders. And Osho, who is one of my teachers, he talks a lot about respect as not something that is automatically just there. It's something to be earned. And it's not hierarchical. It's not about, oh, that's your elder, you must respect them. And he actually flips the whole thing on its head and says, what about respecting the children? and and letting them have a voice in what it is that they want, what are their desires, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, in Chinese culture, it's very, I don't think this was always the case, but I think something happened 150 years ago that shifted the energy of how modern Chinese culture is. And a lot of it comes from imperialism and having to then warp the old Confucian values and make them a little bit, it's like mutant Confucian values. Because if you look at the
Mhm.
Taoist and Confucian ways, a lot of these precepts of paying respect to father as the sky and mother as the earth, these are very shamanic principles that you see in indigenous cultures, except there's not such a attachment to what that means. Whereas when you say these phrases, well, my parents would say it like, you must honor me as the earth. I mean, that's very poetic in Chinese, and they'll scream at me, yelling, saying these poetic things. And you must respect father as the sky, and it's like, oh my God, and so I would hear all these poetic sayings in Chinese growing up, and I would never understand because it was such a dogmatic understanding of these principles of respect. And I think I picked up at a young age that their expression of these phrases was colored by some sort of pain and hurt in them that I didn't quite understand. And it was only when they would melt down because they were totally overwhelmed and they would never express their feelings that they would then start talking about their past with communism and all the things they experienced with my dad's mom getting murdered and family turning on each other just to stay safe, and then
Yeah.
having to flee and run from people because they would get killed, and then having to swim to Hong Kong, and like all these crazy, crazy things. And I remember going, oh wow, okay, I've never experienced that. Okay, I can sort of start to see where they're coming from, why hurt people. I got
Right.
that at a young age, that they're hurt and they're still hurt and they're hurting me not knowingly. And so part of me knew this so I could empathize with them, but also that was like the adult soul version of me that kind of saw things from this very zoomed out perspective, because I just had these insights as a kid. However, the child human version of me was like, oh no, but I want mommy to hold me in the way that I see
Right.
other mothers holding children. My mom never really, my parents weren't physically affectionate. I want my father to, be more present. He was very much checked out most of the time and just providing, being the breadwinner, and not really emotionally involved with us growing up. So I wanted my parents to be a certain way, but they weren't. So I had to hide those parts of me that wanted. And I think because I knew that if I showed, actually, when I did show desire, that I wanted something, I would get either smacked or shut down, or, so it was a big no. And even though the other part of the higher, more evolved consciousness aspect of me that was picking up on all these things as a kid knew that this wasn't the truth, it, I still let that the victimized part of me take over, and that pretty much governed my life as
Yeah.
a young adult. So I, I think it wasn't until my early 20s that I started to unravel that big ball of repressed emotions. So it took a
Yeah.
while. And I
Yeah.
think I'm quite fortunate, because some people don't do that work until they're like in their 40s or 50s. And I was really fortunate to have role models and guides and mentors at a younger age to point me in the right direction.
Yeah, that's huge. We talk a lot about the role of mentors in the work that I do and on this show, both our external mentors, whether that's coaches or therapists or just wise people that we come across or books or podcasts, but also our own internal mentors. And that can be our spiritual relationship or religious relationship or even just our intuition. And what kind of mentors did you have and role models, and how did you find them?
Well, it's okay. This is part of the whole inner rebel thing that I experienced as a kid. Even though I wanted mom and dad's approval, there was this part of me is like, no, I'm going to do what I want. So I left for acting school, which was a big no-no in my family. So I went to go study theater because it was the only place that I felt like misfits belonged. I mean, you look at shows like Glee and all these types of shows where the theater kids are a little bit
Yeah.
mismatched, right? And so I found comfort in that. And so I went off to theater conservatory for 4 years, and it was actually there that I was exposed to yoga and to various mind body somatic practices. And it was more mental, physical, psychological. And that was an accidental discovery into spirituality, because the
Yeah.
purpose of doing yoga in that context, in acting training, and in doing mind body somatic work was more about you as a person learning more about your physical tension, your physical habits, how to let go of it so you can be a more efficient, more truthful actor on stage for performance, for telling the story. But something happened in that process. I realized, oh my goodness, I'm not separate of this character. You hear this a lot with not as nuanced actors. You hear, I hear this sometimes, and they say things like, "Oh, I'm playing a part that's not myself. So I'm spending my career being someone I'm not." And that wasn't the case for me as an actor. Actually, our teachers taught us that you're just accentuating a part of you and highlighting that more. So every character you play, even if it's a villain, I've played very awful characters. I played a Japanese rapist who during World War II, during their occupation of Korea. I've played gangsters and people that did really awful things. But what you realize in playing dark characters is that the only reason you can play those characters is that there's a seed of that within yourself.
Yeah.
and you're just choosing consciously in your normal, me Johnson, my normal day to not let that come out. But you also learn to empathize with it, because when you're playing a villain, you don't think you're bad. Your intentions may sound the same as, Joe Schmo down the block who has a similar intention. I want approval, but Joe down the block may be looking for approval by doing nice things and buying flowers for, his mom on Mother's Day. And then this other person is looking for, the villain is looking for approval because they want the world to recognize them because they haven't dealt with their inner wounds or whatever it is. Everyone expresses their need for approval differently. So you notice that the intentions for every human being is very much the same. Everyone just wants to be loved and to love. They just have different ways of doing it. And when you start
Yeah.
to see that, there's something in you that shifts. There's a spiritual connection that you just cannot help but develop. And I think really good actors realize that. I mean, the theater was always, it was always grounded in its portrayal of the divine. You see this in ancient Greek theater. It was all reflection of the Greek gods, and they're portraying the stories. That's what theater was. And in that I started, so my first teachers were my theater teachers. And then I was curious. I was like, what is this yoga business? I want to go deeper into the spiritual aspect. So I started going to a studio where they taught a little bit more of the philosophy of yoga. And then that took me into meditation. And then that brought me into energy work, where I studied to be a master Reiki practitioner, and then doing shamanic work as well. And then body work. I was really into uncovering what the body was holding on to, because I had the craziest experiences with my body shaking,
Yeah.
not even controlling, and going into these releases, crying hysterically into maniacally laughing from one moment to the next. Like,
Yeah.
what is my body doing? And I'm not even doing this. It is just having its release. So I was always very curious as to, how the body was storing memory and experiences. So I studied body work and meeting different mentors and spiritual teachers along the way to help facilitate that. And so I've been very blessed in that I've met just the right person to take me there.
Yeah.
And they've always pushed me into my blind spots and forced me to look at things that I never considered before. And it's just changed everything in how I look at the world. So,
Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's so, when I started working to heal my trauma, it was fascinating to me how the body and the mind work. And I kept, at first, I really believed like mind over matter, right? Like if I just like decide and think this way, like I can just do these things and heal myself. And then my body would start shaking or things would start happening or I would have panic attacks, and it was just like, "Oh, I'm not this is not a mind over matter thing, like, it's in my body and it has to process out."
mm. And I think it's also the permission piece too, to allow ourselves to see what's happening that's already there, and waking up to the fact that that energy that is moving through can either be felt or numbed out. And I remember I was laying there on the floor in a fetal position, and it was a class called Feldenkrais. And you can look up Feldenkrais if you're not familiar with his work, but his work was very much on mind body somatics. And he was a scientist engineer who injured himself, and he didn't want to go the surgical route, so he did a lot of inquiry based work into his body and figuring out these little fidgety movements back and forth, and just watching, let's say, like the rotation of your head, and doing that for 3 to 5, 10 minutes,
Yeah.
but then with very specific awareness points of how it's moving. Is it moving from the different senses? Is it moving from your eyes? Are you turning your head from your sense of hearing? Is it from your taste? Right. And all these different types of exercises. And I remember I was laying on my side, and my teacher was asking me to undulate my pelvis. And she was asking specifically to see if we can separate the movement of the sacrum and the tail and the pelvic bowl from the thigh bones, from how the femur is attached into the socket. So those of you who are anatomically inclined, you probably understand. For those of you who are not, you may not have thought of that before, and it might make you question and then look at Google and look at what that looks like. But I had never at that point in time, at 19 years old, considered that my pelvis and my legs were actually a ball and socket connected together. And by moving my tail and letting it fluctuate like that, and to feel the difference, and then but also feel them working together as a team, that separation and connection, it sent me somewhere else. I went into I felt this warm current of electricity move up my spine. And then I started, of course, sobbing hysterically. I was like, oh my God, my tailbone. And I didn't understand at the time, but that was the beginning of what people call a Kundalini awakening, because
Yeah.
it was a current of energy that I could feel. And all it is an awakening to something that's already happening. And so permission and allowing ourselves to see that, in a movement context or in a yoga class even, can be really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. During all of this exploration, did was it just curiosity based, or were you looking to heal some of your trauma and some of your deeper stuff?
I think at first it was about curiosity, because in acting school, the first thing they teach you is the what if principle. So what if you were Adolf Hitler and you had to play him as a character? What if you were a parent who lost all your children during the plague in the Middle Ages? I don't know, whatever it is, right? So you have to be curious as an actor. What if I were this person who seems so different from me? And in wanting to understand that, you realize actually there are certain parts of you that you can find within that character. And so the curiosity piece led me to explore my humanity in a different way, to empathize with the more shadowy, those parts of ourselves that we judge, like, oh, I would never do that as a
Yes.
person. I would never, okay, you say you would never, but you weren't, like, I'm trying to think now, like, once in school I had to play this, the myth of Jason and Medea
Mhm.
in ancient Greek mythology. So there was this contemporary Irish version written by Marina Carr. It was called The Bog of Cats, and I don't know why I got cast as like this Irishman. I'm this like Asian. I thought I would be cast in the ethnic show, but I got cast in like the Irish show. I was like, I had to put in this Irish accent. I was like, all right, whatever, colorblind casting. Here we go. So here I am, this Irishman, and there's this whole like rivalry between the character who's the Jason equivalent and the Medea equivalent. I can't remember the characters' names anymore, and they're fighting over like custody of the child. And the wife, does all these awful things. She even burns down the caravan and like kills her kid, and we say that we would never do those things, but we don't necessarily know the kind of history, the kind of karma that has led that character to do such a heinous act. But in the moment, those were her decisions. They were not the best decisions, but it comes from a whole history of unresolved issues. And I think that is what you learn as a performer. You learn to empathize with these really dark parts of yourselves, and you don't judge it, because that's not your job. Your job is not to judge it. Your job is to bring it out so other people can see it and reflect on it and go, oh, right. What was the question again? I can't remember.
Well, you kind of answered it. So it began curiosity based. So I
Yes.
guess the question would now be, at what point did you start to realize like you're doing your own healing and growth work?
I think it was when my second year acting teacher sent me to the therapist. He's like, you need to go to therapy. I was like, what? How dare you? Right? What do you mean I have to go to therapy? So what happened was I was failing, basically. We were all put on probation. We were in this, again, competitive environment where there was a cut system. We entered with 22 people into a very competitive conservatory environment, and we graduated with 15. You're all put on probation for the first year. By the second year, I was still on probation. If you're on probation for 2 more semesters, you're out. And I would go, oh my God, I can't get, that would be a no-no. So here I was overachieving again. I'm like, I'm going to prove to everyone that I'm not going to fail. So instead of presenting one final scene for the end of the semester, we're doing Chekhov. And Anton Chekhov wrote very bleak plays that reflected, Russian, like just the Russian like life, out in like this just harsh, bleak, melancholic characters who were alcoholic, who had gambling issues. Like he wrote like really dark things in seemingly very ordinary life, and that was what was really disturbing about a lot of his work, because it was quite ordinary. And so I decided to do 3 scenes with 3 different scene partners back to back to show that I was good enough, right? And what happened was, because I did 3 back-to-back scenes, I started to, and I was playing this character Ivanov, who ends, the climax of the play is that he feels super despicable as an awful human being because he hurts his wife so badly. He cheats on his wife with this like young maid. He has gambled all his money away. He's married his wife, who's Jewish, for her dowry, and he himself has no money, and he's borrowed all this money that he can't return. And so here he is having this affair. He hates his wife and resents her because she had to convert to be Christian. Her family disowned her, and so he now has no dowry. He has no money. He's broke, and he resents the wife. They're not in love, and she's sick. She has like this. She has this like disease that is basically terminal, and so he goes into this space where he basically insults her and says, "You're gonna die," and starts calling her all these like awful racial slurs. And then he realized, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm a terrible human being. And at the end, he has this meltdown. And he goes, oh my God, I'm a terrible human being. Will you forgive me? I'm despicable. I'm awful. I'm awful. I'm awful. And I literally felt that because of what I was going through at the time. I felt Johnson's an awful person for hiding from, I was still also hiding. I was trying to be like straight and like be like this straight actor, I'm hiding from people. I'm hiding from, I'm not telling people about, my family. I'm still like repressing a lot of my emotions. I feel terrible because I feel that, my acting professors think I'm a terrible actor. And so I actually feel like a despicable human being. And so then the two merged, and I literally didn't have a meltdown as the character. I had a meltdown as Johnson. And I went into this like state where I was curled up into a ball in the acting studio, shaking and convulsing because I got the character confused with me. And it became a bit psychologically damaging to the point where I couldn't leave that emotional state. And everyone realized in class that something was wrong here. I was like there was not the separation, the safe separation of actor and character. And my teacher literally gave like the whole class a talk about acting is not, a psychological therapeutic release. If you have issues, you need to go see a counselor or a therapist. And I felt even worse. I was like, oh my God. So then he sent me off to the therapist, and I did. And I actually didn't find it helpful because in therapy, they kept me diving into the past and analyzing, and I'm already a very analytical person. So they kept me analyzing why I think the way I think, what I do, what actions I choose, and relating it to a particular scenario from the past. So in that context, it was always going to be everything I do now is a result of something that happened to me in the past. And that for me perpetuated this victim mentality, like I couldn't change it. So in therapy, I would just literally cry myself. Like I would leave feeling worse than I did because I was like, oh my God, I have more issues. And it was like, I keep doing this because of that. So I kept equating something to the past. And it was more in like meditative work, the shamanic work, where there was more of this empowering quality of, wait a minute, yes, that's where it comes from. And now what? Let's take the symbol of let's say like for example, for me one of the things was like a neck thing. My neck was really forward. I would hold my posture out like this, and I would like, I didn't realize it at the time, but I'd be walking out like a duck. Like my head was like out here, and then my body was like way behind me, and my back was like, it was all types of weird. my posture. And so that's my physical. Symbolically, metaphorically, what that was representing was my fear of coming into my heart space. So if I pulled my head back and stacked my head up over my heart, you would see that the head and the heart's bridged by the neck and the throat. And in order to do that, I needed a sense of safety and trust that everything was okay. And I could not allow everything to be okay if I kept seeing the world as this dog eat dog scenario. So I needed to learn how to trust, to be okay with people. And I had to do a
Yeah.
lot of body work actually for that. I had my teacher, like one of my female teachers, she would hold and cradle my head and neck. It was on our private one-on-one table sessions. And she would literally just hold it very lightly, do the lightest little traction. And she had the sweetest little angelic voice. And she would say, imagine your neck being long and free. And she would say some other things, softening the jaw. It was so simple. But in that moment, I felt a mother's love. That was me projecting,
Yeah.
of course, that I never got from my mom. My mom's like the opposite. She's like a thunderbolt hurling through the sky. She's crazy fierce, and this woman is like the opposite. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is what I've always wanted as a child. And in that release, I felt safe. And I had to practice that over and over and over again. And in allowing the safety to be there for a longer period of time, and then being curious as to, oh, how can I keep this more? Oh, wait a minute, I need to change the way I'm looking at the world. Oh, okay. So yeah, curiosity is key, because if we're not curious,
Yeah.
we don't even know it's trauma. We're just like, oh, that's just how the world is. I just
Yeah.
lash out and react at people violently all the time. That's how the world is. So yeah, curiosity I think is super important.
Yeah, that's so powerful. So, how did you go from how did you step into who you are now, both in terms of coming out, but also realizing that theater wasn't the path for you, and then beginning to do the work that you do today?
Well, so I realized that on stage, and I had this on-off relationship with theater. I had this dream of like going to LA and auditioning for sci-fi shows and just being this alien on TV, because I loved Star Trek, and I loved aliens and sci-fi, and there was this fantastical escape element that always intrigued me, because I always felt alien and other
Yeah.
as a child. So I always resonated with the aliens on TV shows. I was like, oh, that's me. I'm the alien. Alien, me. So so then when I realized that, wait a minute, that's just me being, an escape artist here. That's probably not so healthy. In diving into more of the meditative work, because I realized that wherever I went, I was there. And I had, it's making lots of mistakes. I would run away from New York, and I would take all the money I saved up waiting tables, because that's the thing you do in New York. You wait tables, you act. You wait tables, you act. And so I took all my tip money, and I would just fly away just to escape and have a different experience. But I couldn't run from my thoughts and from my head. And I think it was doing that a few times and making the same mistake that I realized, okay, I need to do something about this. And then I
Yeah.
realized that acting was not actually grounding for me, because as an actor, you're constantly put into situations where you have to deal with rejection. You audition for 100 gigs, you probably get two, right? And then you also, there's an integrity question. How many times do I want to audition for the geeky engineer on some TV show, or whatever it is, some where you get typecasted. And
Right.
so you have to navigate what your heart desires, and also to eat, like, okay, I have to do these things because otherwise I won't get seen, and I shouldn't say no. And so this integrity piece comes into play, and I realize, wait a minute, why am I doing this? Am I doing this to therapize myself, or am I doing this because I genuinely love the art of storytelling? And actually what I really loved was stage work, where I felt this meditative flow of living life larger than it actually was on a day to day. That's what it felt like on stage for, an hour and a half, 2 hours of doing a show. You're so focused on the other actor, on the story, on delivering something that's honest, truthful. It becomes this meditative, energetic flow. That's how it felt for me anyway. Then I realized, wait a minute, I can do this in meditation. I can sit and when I
Yeah.
started to realize, oh, it's the same feeling, that's when I started to slowly make the shift into really going more on the healing path. And then I had a big ayahuasca plant medicine experience when I was 26, and that changed everything for me because I realized I went in with the intention asking ayahuasca, the medicine, and I communicated with her and I said, where am I meant to go? Can you please show me? Am I meant to continue forcing down this path of actor, which felt like an uphill
Yeah.
battle? Everywhere I went, it was like so hard. Or do I go down something else? Do I go down more this yoga healing path, which I already was on, but I wasn't fully embracing and I was split between two worlds? And she opened the door and just showed me this other healing path, and it was frightening and exciting all at the same time. I saw spirits everywhere. I saw shadowy things. I saw really bright angelic deities. I saw all the stuff that was hovering around everyone in that room. I saw it very clearly. And then I was like, no, I don't want to see this. And I tried to close my eyes, but it was still there. I was like, okay, so this is my answer. I didn't realize it at the time, but in retrospect, I was like, oh, I'm being shown that I can tap into the unseen realities. And so go there. And so it took me another year to like accept that. And I was like, oh no, God, I'm going to shut that door again. And then
Yeah.
I went back the acting route, right? So I had a bit of a push and a pull with it. And then eventually I embraced it. And then I came back to acting again, like about 5 years ago. And I was, in Singapore. I lived in Singapore for 6 years, and I did Shakespeare in the Park for 30,000 people in the park for a month. And we had like 2,000 people every night in this massive park. And it was Merchant of Venice, beautiful performance. But I still felt a little hollow at the end of the performance. I thought, why am I not, why am I not in love with this? And I realized that I've actually grown out of this, that my journey into acting was really just for me to learn more about myself, to send me off into this healing journey. So now I
Yeah.
just tell stories through helping people with their own stories, and that feels more aligned with where I am now.
Yeah. That's amazing. And so, how did you begin to do the speaking and the writing and the coaching?
That's an interesting thing too. I think everything happens by, I don't want to say accident, but it's when one door closes, you decide to close, like, okay, that's the end of that chapter of my life, and you commit your
Yes.
energy to a new direction. I wasn't sure where I was going. I was like, okay, I'm teaching. So here I am teaching. And then teaching led to, I opened up a studio in Singapore, and so I had this boutique studio. We did yoga and Pilates and meditation. We did workshops. We did retreats all over Southeast Asia. But then that didn't feel quite right. And then there was, in meditation, sometimes you get intuition, you get visions, and you get shown things. And so it was like, oh, okay, now I'm in Australia, right? So I was like, okay, why am I here? And I've learned that whenever I get shown something or experience something, sometimes it comes through feeling in the body, and it's just this download of feelings. It's like a picture book, like a cartoon book of this is where you must go. You
Yep.
don't know exactly where you're gonna go, but if you don't listen, it's gonna feel difficult. And I've learned that. I've gone, I've heard and I've listened, and then I've shut the door. I'm like, no, 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 I don't want that. And my ego goes, no, no, I don't think so. You must be wrong up there, right? But I think a lot of the writing and it was, again, it was intuitive. It was inspired from a place that is other than my own. And like, well, a psychic once did say, oh, you're going to write a book. This was like in my 20s. I'm like, what are you talking about? No, 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 no. This is crazy. So, but then in the moment, I was like, oh, wait, something's coming in and telling me to go into it. Because I started writing, I was writing something more for a training manual for meditation teacher training. And then it turned into more storytelling because I felt the only way I could authentically share about altered and expanded states of consciousness was through personal
Yeah.
experiences. And then it just started to morph into this. And of course, with my theater background, it was just the way that I was writing. And I never, ever considered writing a book but I did journal, and so that kind of just took on its own life. And I think the speaking naturally was me bridging this aspect of me that has always wanted to perform, but instead of performing as a character, I'm just talking about
Yeah.
myself and my experiences, and hopefully that might reflect something that is like a hidden seed of potential in someone else. And so it was kind of bridging the theater world and the spiritual world together, and that's
Yeah.
where that happened. And so now it's kind of come full circle, which I didn't understand at the time, but it's like, oh right, that's why I went to theater school. Right, I got
Yep.
it. Now it makes sense. We don't know. We don't really know why we're
No.
doing things sometimes when we're in it. And it's only like, 10, 15 years we look back and we're like, oh, right.
Exactly. To kind of wrap up the whole conversation, what is one thing that you wish you would have known back when you were a child or a teenager?
I think I don't know. I think that's a hard question because on one hand, I think I learned a lot through pain. And then on another hand, if I were to go back and tell young Johnson something, it would be to trust with more ease that the universe
Mm.
has got your back, that pain is temporary, right? The sensation of getting your heart broken by your parents or from a future lover or whoever it might be, from not getting the thing you want. Trust that it's going to be okay, that the world is actually a safe place. And I think that piece of safety, if we all just realize that it's not the way that we make it out to be, because it's what we're projecting out into the world, then we allow ourselves to do more. We could, because if we're not safe, we can't create, because we're in this fight flight mode, right? It's that first stage of
Yeah.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We got to get food, water, shelter. We need love and affection and all these things to make sure that we're okay. If we're not okay, I mean, we're just going to keep fighting for those things. So that would be the one thing I think I would tell my young
Yeah.
self.
Yeah, it's beautiful. We're going to link to everything of yours in the show notes. But before we sign off, tell everyone where they can find you and how they can learn from you and work with you.
Sure. I am on the socials. So on Instagram, it's my name, Johnson Chong, JOHNSONCHONG _ Sage Sapien, SAGESAPIEN, which is the name of my book is called Sage Sapien from Karma
Yeah.
to Dharma. And it's available on Barnes & Noble, Amazon, ebook or paperback. And Facebook, it's the same as well. And I'm on my website's just my name, actually, johnsonchong.com.
Yeah.
And next year is super exciting because I'm launching a LGBTQ plus spiritual program for 8 weeks and taking this intensive that I have been running with, I don't want to say normal folk, because then that, but like the non-LGBTQ plus folks that I have been running this program with, but making it more queer specific, and transforming our karma
Yeah.
into dharma. And so that's the kind of stuff I'm doing.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Awesome. Johnson, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your journey and your wisdom. I so appreciate it.
thanks for having me on the show, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for being a part of this powerful community of purpose driven individuals. We have a ton of free resources for you at www.talesfromthejourney.tv/free, including access to an 8-week sampler of our renowned journey mapping program. That gives you instant access to impactful training lessons, life-changing exercises, and our signature AccuSesh processes that you can implement immediately. We'd love your help in getting the message out and growing our community, so please take a moment to share this episode, subscribe to the podcast, and leave us a review on iTunes. I'll catch you in the next episode.